Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And you guys have sent in some really interesting excerpts. I'm really excited to kind of get into it and see what we can learn about how our minds work.
Yeah, it's a really cool book. It's really fascinating look at how we make decisions. And yeah, I think it's full of these counterintuitive insights that can really change how you view the world.
Yeah, okay. So for those who haven't had a chance to read the book yet, can you give us like the quick summary of Kahneman's central argument?
Sure, yeah. So Kahneman argues that we have two systems of thinking, and they're kind of constantly at play. And he calls these system one and system two. System one is fast, intuitive, emotional. It's what allows you to like effortlessly complete the phrase bread and
Butter. Yeah, like our autopilot.
exactly, yeah. It's like autopilot.
Yeah.
And then system two is slower, more deliberate. It's what you would use for like complex problem solving or careful analysis. But the catch is that system one, it really likes to jump in and take shortcuts. And this often leads us to like biased or irrational decisions.
Okay, so one of the excerpts that you highlighted talks about assuming that adultery is more common amongst politicians than, say, doctors. And even Kahneman himself realized that this was due to like just the sheer volume of news coverage on political scandals.
Right. Yeah. That's a classic example of what is called the availability heuristic. So system one relies on what easily pops into our mind. So the more easily we recall examples, the more likely we believe that something is true, even if it's statistically inaccurate.
That makes sense, yeah. It's like how like a recent shark attack might make us terrified of swimming in the ocean, even though statistically it's far more dangerous to like drive a car.
Exactly. Yeah. Understanding this bias can really help us put things into perspective and make more rational judgments.
Okay, so another excerpt mentions the mental shotgun. What is that all about? It sounds intense.
Yeah, so the mental shotgun is this really fascinating phenomenon where our minds process far more information than we consciously intend to. So you can think of it like you're trying to focus on a single task, but your brain is kind of firing off in all directions, taking in irrelevant details, going on these like little mental side quests.
Okay, I'm picturing my brain as a hyperactive puppy, chasing after every squirrel and butterfly that crosses its path.
Yeah, that's a perfect image. And the problem is that even this irrelevant information, it can subtly influence our decisions without us even realizing it.
So our brains are like overachievers who can't help but do extra credit even when it throws off the whole grade.
Exactly.
That's so fascinating. One excerpt that I found particularly interesting was about pupil dilation during mental tasks.
Yeah, so Kahneman and his colleagues, they found that our pupils actually widen when we engage in effortful thinking. They even discovered that just adding one to a series of digits, requires a surprising amount of mental energy.
Wow, so our eyes literally betray how hard our brains are working.
Exactly, yeah. And this ties into the concept of ego depletion. So mental effort, it's tiring. After a demanding day, your system two might be too exhausted to resist that late night ice cream craving.
It explains so much about my questionable late night decisions.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that. It's really important to be mindful of mental fatigue, especially when making important choices. Don't schedule that crucial meeting after a mentally draining day. Your system two might be too depleted to make the best call.
Yeah, great advice. I'm definitely guilty of trying to power through when I should just be giving my brain a break. Now, one excerpt that really sent chills down my spine was about priming. It's almost spooky.
Yeah, priming is a bit unsettling. It's the idea that exposure to certain words or concepts, even unconsciously, can influence our thoughts and actions. For example, there was this experiment where students were primed with words related to old age, and they actually walked slower afterwards.
Wait, seriously? So reading words like wrinkle or retirement could subconsciously make me like shuffle my feet. That's wild.
Yeah, the research suggests that these unconscious influences are very real. And it raises some pretty thought-provoking questions about free will. If our actions can be swayed by things that we're not even aware of, how much control do we truly have?
Okay. I'm both fascinated and a little creeped out now. But this is why I love diving deep into these books. It makes you question everything.
Yeah, and that's the power of Kahneman's work.
Yeah.
It is unsettling, but it's also empowering. Once you understand these cognitive biases, you can start to recognize them in yourself and make more conscious choices.
So knowing that the house is haunted doesn't mean you have to move out. You just need to learn where the creaky floorboards are so you don't get spooked.
Exactly. And Kahneman provides us with the tools to navigate the haunted house of our own minds.
I love that. Okay, so we've got this like fast thinking system one, always looking for shortcuts, prone to biases. And then we've got our lazy system two, which should be in charge, but often gets hijacked by our impulsive autopilot. What other mental phenomena do we need to be aware of?
Well, one that's really closely related to priming is cognitive ease. It's this idea that things that feel familiar, easy to process, they just simply feel right to our brains. And that makes us more likely to perceive them as true, even if they're not.
So you're saying that if something is easy to understand, we're more likely to believe
Right,
them.
precisely. Think about like marketing and advertising. Catchy jingles and rhyming slogans. They aren't just memorable, they're exploiting cognitive ease. Simple, repetitive information feels more fluent and therefore more believable to our brains.
So a slogan like head on applied directly to the forehead, even though it makes no logical sense, it's effective because it's simple and repetitive.
Exactly. It creates this illusion of truth through cognitive ease. Even something as simple as using an easy-to-read font can make information seem more credible. It's all about how effortlessly our brains can process it.
Wow. I'm never going to look at a marketing campaign the same way again. This is like learning the secret code to decipher the world around us.
Yeah, and that's just the beginning. Kahneman goes on to explore the power of narrative, how our brains crave these coherent stories, and how this can lead to biases like the hindsight bias.
Hindsight bias. What's that?
So hindsight bias is the tendency to see past events as more predictable than they actually were.
Oh, right. Like when your favorite team loses a game and suddenly everyone's an expert on what they should have done.
Yeah.
They should have gone for it on fourth down.
Precisely, yeah. Hindsight, it makes us unfairly critical of past decisions, forgetting that at the time, the outcome was far from certain.
Hindsight is 20/20, as they say.
Mm.
Okay, so we're wired for storytelling. We're prone to hindsight bias. What can we do about it?
Well, that's where Kahneman's work becomes truly valuable. By understanding these cognitive biases, we can start to challenge our own assumptions, seek out different perspectives, and make more informed decisions.
So instead of just like accepting the first catchy narrative that comes along, we need to dig deeper, ask more questions, and maybe even embrace a little bit of uncertainty.
Exactly. That's the key to becoming better thinkers.
This is making me think about all the times I've bought into a sure thing or a can't miss opportunity, only to be disappointed later.
Yeah, well, Kahneman also tackles the limitations of expertise. Even experts are prone to biases, especially in fields like finance and politics where uncertainty reigns supreme.
So even the so-called experts can get it wrong. But if they can't get it right, what hope is there for the rest of us?
That's a great question. And it actually leads us to one of Kahneman's most surprising insights, which is that simple algorithms often outperform expert judgment.
Algorithms, like those things that tell you what to watch on Netflix.
Yeah, similar concept. An algorithm is basically a set of rules or instructions for making a decision. So think about the APGAR score. It's used to assess newborn babies. That's an algorithm. And it's been incredibly effective in saving lives.
So you're saying that sometimes a formula can be more reliable than even the most seasoned expert.
That's right. And often people resist this idea. We have this like ingrained belief in human intuition and expertise, even when the evidence suggests otherwise.
Right, like we want to believe that the wine critic with the fancy vocabulary knows more than some mathematical formula, even if the formula is better at predicting which wines will age well.
Exactly. We tend to overestimate the role of intuition in human judgment, even when algorithms have proven to be more accurate.
This is a lot to digest, but I'm starting to see how these pieces fit together. Our two systems of thinking, all these cognitive biases, our tendency to cling to narratives and expert opinions even when they're flawed. What does it all mean for us? How can we apply these insights to make better decisions in our everyday lives? That's what I really want to know.
Well, Kahneman offers a lot of practical advice, and we'll dive into that in more detail in the next part of our deep dive. But one key takeaway is the importance of recognizing our own biases. We need to become more aware of the mental shortcuts that our brains are taking, the emotional influences that are shaping our judgments, and the narratives that color our perceptions.
That makes sense. But how do we actually do that? We can't just turn off our system one or suddenly become experts in every field.
You're absolutely right. It's not about eliminating bias altogether. That's impossible. But there are things we can do to mitigate their influence. So Kahneman suggests seeking out what he calls the outside view.
The outside view, what's that?
So it involves taking a step back from our subjective perspective and considering the broader context. So instead of focusing solely on our unique circumstances, we need to look at base rates, statistical probabilities, historical data, the kind of information that our intuitive system one tends to ignore.
So if I'm planning a new project at work and I'm feeling super optimistic about the timeline, I should check the data on how long similar projects have taken in the past, even if it bursts my bubble.
Exactly. That's the outside view in action. It's about tempering our optimism with a dose of reality.
This is making me think about all those times I've underestimated how long it takes to finish a task. I'm definitely guilty of the planning fallacy.
Oh, we all are. Yeah, it's one of the most common cognitive biases. But by recognizing it, by seeking out the outside view, we can make more realistic plans and avoid setting ourselves up for disappointment.
Okay, I'm definitely going to try that. What other tools does Kahneman give us for outsmarting our own biases?
Well, another powerful technique that he recommends is using structured approaches to decision making. So instead of just going with our gut feeling, we should break down complex decisions into smaller components. Consider all the relevant factors and weigh the pros and cons systematically.
So instead of impulsively buying that shiny new gadget, I should make a list of the features that I need, compare prices, and consider the long-term costs and benefits, even if it's less fun.
Precisely. It's about engaging system two, giving it the information that it needs to make a rational decision.
This is starting to feel like a workout for my brain. But I'm seeing how these strategies can help us make better choices, even when our intuition is trying to lead us astray.
And that's the beauty of Kahneman's work. It doesn't just describe our cognitive biases, it gives us the tools to overcome them.
This is empowering. I'm feeling ready to take on my own irrationality. But before we get too carried away, let's take a moment to let our brains digest all this juicy information. We'll be back in the next part of our deep dive to explore more of Kahneman's practical advice and uncover even more fascinating insights. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to our deep dive into thinking fast and slow.
Before we jumped off, we were talking about how to outsmart those pesky cognitive biases that Kahneman so brilliantly exposes. What other strategies does he offer for becoming better decision makers?
One technique I find particularly insightful is the concept of premortems.
Pre-mortems, that sounds kind of intense, like a post-mortem but before the event.
Exactly. So imagine you're about to embark on a major project. A premortem involves gathering your team and saying, okay, let's pretend this project has completely failed. What went wrong?
Oh, that's brilliant. It's like a mental fire drill for decision making.
Yeah, it forces you to confront those potential problems before they even arise. By thinking through the what ifs and, identifying weaknesses in your plan, you can kind of anticipate challenges and potentially avoid costly mistakes.
I can see how that would be so valuable, especially for someone like me who tends to get swept away by initial enthusiasm. Okay, pre-mortems, check. What else can we do to kind of keep our cognitive biases in check?
Well, Kahneman also cautions against overly confident predictions. We humans, we have this tendency to overestimate our ability to predict the future, especially in areas with a lot of uncertainty.
Well, I've definitely fallen into that trap before. It's so tempting to believe that we have it all figured out.
Yeah. But the thing is, Kahneman, he points to research showing that those with the most knowledge in a particular field are often the least reliable in their predictions.
That seems counterintuitive. Why would that be?
Because the more we learn about a subject, the more we tend to develop this illusion of skill. We become overconfident in our ability to predict outcomes, even in complex and unpredictable systems.
So the more you know, the less you realize you don't know. It's like the curse of expertise.
Precisely. And this applies to everything, from financial markets to political forecasting to even our personal lives.
Okay, so be humble, be wary of those who claim to have a crystal ball, especially when it comes to long-term predictions.
Got it. Any other practical tips to add to our mental toolkit?
Yeah, so Kahneman also highlights the importance of being mindful of how information is presented to us, something he calls framing.
Framing, like how a photograph can look completely different depending on the frame that you put around it.
Exactly. The same information can be perceived very differently depending on, how it's worded, how it's presented, or how it's contextualized.
So the way information is framed can actually sway our decisions even if the underlying facts are the same.
Precisely. Kahneman gives the example of how people are more likely to choose a medical treatment if it's framed in terms of survival rates rather than mortality rates, even though the statistics are identical. That's fascinating. It means our decisions can be influenced by, seemingly subtle changes in wording or emphasis.
Yeah, it highlights the power of framing to tap into our emotions and shape our perceptions, even when we think we're being completely rational.
This is making me rethink how I process information. It's like a wake-up call to be more critical of how things are presented to us.
Absolutely. We should always try to reframe information, consider alternative perspectives, and challenge our own assumptions about what's being presented.
Okay, so be mindful of framing. Seek out different perspectives. It's like learning to see the world through a new set of lenses. But with all these cognitive biases lurking in the shadows, it can feel kind of overwhelming. Is
Yeah.
there anything we can do to make our brains less susceptible to these mental traps?
Well, just being aware of these biases is a great first step. Kahneman argues that simply knowing about these cognitive pitfalls can make us less likely to fall into them.
So it's like knowing about the existence of pickpockets. It doesn't make you immune to being robbed, but it does make you more vigilant, less likely to leave your wallet hanging out of your back pocket.
Exactly. Awareness is key. And we can also train ourselves to be more reflective in our thinking, to pause before making judgments, and to question our own assumptions.
It sounds like it all comes down to engaging System 2 more often, giving our thoughtful, deliberate selves a chance to take the reins.
Exactly. It takes effort, but the more we practice these habits of mind, the better we become at navigating the complexities of decision making.
I appreciate you walking me through all these practical strategies. It's really making me rethink my entire approach to decision making.
And that's the power of Kahneman's work. It not only illuminates the hidden workings of our minds, but it also empowers us to become more conscious and deliberate thinkers.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I'm starting to see the world through like a new lens, one that's a bit more skeptical, a bit more analytical, but ultimately a lot more empowering. But before we get too carried away, I think we need to give our System 2s a moment to catch their breath.
A wise decision. We'll be back in the final part of this deep dive to wrap things up and explore some of the broader implications of Kahneman's groundbreaking work. Don't miss it.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into thinking fast and slow. I'm still reeling from all the insights we've uncovered about the quirks and biases of our own minds.
It's a real journey of self-discovery, isn't it? Once you start to recognize these patterns in your own thinking, you can't unsee them. It's like they're everywhere.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, there are a couple big questions I still have swirling around in my System 2. So if our intuition is so prone to these errors in judgment, how has we managed to accomplish so much as a species? We've built civilizations, we've created these incredible technologies. It doesn't seem like a bunch of irrational, biased brains could pull that off.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really highlights this paradoxical nature of human cognition. While Kahneman exposes our cognitive limitations, he also acknowledges this remarkable capacity we have for learning, adaptation, and innovation.
So our System 1 might be prone to taking shortcuts, but our System 2 can learn from our mistakes, develop new strategies, and even create systems that help us overcome those biases.
Exactly, yeah. Think about the scientific method. It's a structured approach to inquiry that helps us minimize the influence of individual biases and arrive at more objective truths.
Yeah, it's like we've built these external structures to compensate for our internal biases. We've created systems and processes that help us make more rational decisions, even when our intuition is trying to pull us in a different direction.
That's a great way to put it. And these systems are constantly evolving, just as our understanding of human cognition is constantly evolving.
Okay, one more big question. We've talked a lot about making better decisions, but what about happiness? Does Kahneman offer any insights into how understanding our minds can lead to more fulfilling lives?
He does, yeah. In fact, Kahneman, he dedicates a significant portion of the book to exploring the nature of happiness and well-being. He introduces this concept of two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self.
Two selves. That sounds intriguing.
Yeah, so the experiencing self is the one that's living in the present moment, taking in all the sensations, the emotions, and experiences as they happen. And the remembering self is the one that looks back on those experiences, creating a narrative, a story of our lives.
It's like the experiencing self is watching the movie, and the remembering self is writing the review afterward.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that these two selves don't always agree. The remembering self, it tends to prioritize peak moments and endings, often neglecting the duration of an experience.
So we might remember a vacation based on a few highlight moments, even if, most of the trip was fairly uneventful. Or judge an entire relationship based on how it ended, even if it was mostly happy for years before that.
That's right, Isley. And so Kahneman suggests that we should pay more attention to our experiencing selves, to savor the present moment, appreciate the duration of positive experiences, even if they don't produce the most vivid memories.
So it's not just about chasing those peak moments or trying to craft the perfect life story. It's about finding joy in the everyday, the ordinary, the in-between moments.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from what will look good in retrospect to what feels good right now.
That's making me realize how often I kind of rush through experiences, trying to capture the perfect photo, tell the perfect story. I'm so focused on creating the memory that I forget to actually enjoy the experience itself.
Yeah, it's a common trap in our social media-driven world. But by becoming more aware of these two selves, we can make choices that prioritize the well-being of our experiencing selves, even if those choices don't generate the most shareable memories.
This has been an incredible journey. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of how my mind works, how I make decisions, and even how I experience happiness.
Yeah, and that's the power of thinking fast and slow. It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it, prompting you to question your assumptions, challenge your biases, and ultimately become a more conscious and deliberate thinker.
It's definitely a book that I will be revisiting. Thank you so much for guiding me through this fascinating exploration of the human mind.
It's been my pleasure. And for those of you listening, if you want to dive into Thinking Fast and Slow yourself, we'll have a link to the book on Amazon down in the episode description.
And be sure to subscribe to the One Book a Day YouTube channel for more deep dives into thought-provoking books like this one. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those System 2s engaged.